Hi, everybody. I'm Bernstein, and welcome to our first boxing hangout. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to visiting with all of you as we continue on to do these hangouts. This is the maiden voyage, of course, and I want to remind you right now that we will have another one, and it will be right after Saturday night's Showtime fight. It'll be about a half hour after the Showtime Championship Boxing show, in which I will be on, and you'll have a chance to interact with me and ask questions about the fights of that night. Before we get to all of talking about those fights and some other things going on in the world of boxing, and of course our special guest, Kevin Iole, let me bring in the gentleman who created this Google Hangout for me and who is going to be guiding the ship. He's a brilliant social media consultant and also writes on MMA and boxing. My good friend Dan Parks. Dan, thank you for creating all this for me.
Thank you, Al. I really appreciate it. And it's been this has been a dream of mine for about a year now. About a year ago, I came to you, if you remember, after one of the fights, and I actually brought this shirt here.
There, look it, there I am.
Boxing Hangouts, right there. And I came to you and I told you I had a dream, and I mean, literally sitting with you after one of these major fights and listening to you with your friends and some of the other top boxing writers, talking about what we had just got through watching, and also talking about some of the future prospects with other fighters, was amazing to me. And I remember going home that night and I told everybody that I knew, I said, I felt like I was the luckiest fly on the wall that you could possibly be. I mean, I was sitting there with boxing royalty, and some of the insights and some of the things that you guys talked about was just, whew, it was so amazing and off of the top of your heads, and it was just so fantastic for me. And immediately I started thinking, this would be so great if everyone could see something like this and start doing something like this right after a major fight, or and be able to get some top people together and sit around and with you and talk about what we had just got through seeing. And anyway, I'm thrilled to be here. And again, I'm the happiest fly on the wall that you could possibly have. And I'm going to do my best to try and keep this technology working the way it's supposed to work, and keep your fingers crossed, because you know how it's a little glitchy, and we'll do the best we can, and I'm excited to get this off the ground.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I appreciate your efforts in getting this going. And as Dan said, the next next boxing hangout we have on Google Plus and on YouTube, of course, you'll have a chance to interact with me and others that we have on as well. Now, on this one, we want to do a nice preview of what's coming up in the weekend to come. And one of the things that is coming up in the weekend, and we're going to be talking to Kevin about it in just a moment or two, is the card in Brooklyn, the Battle of Brooklyn, with Pauli Malignaggi taking on Zab Judah, fight I'll be privileged to do on Showtime. And, of course, that's a stacked card. There's Adrien and Lara, there's Zab and Pauli Malignaggi, two fighters who, by the way, could have met each other at any time during the course of their careers, but it just didn't quite happen. And even getting it to happen this time was tricky, but they did, and I think they're both at a stage in their career that it's a pretty interesting fight. Along with that fight, there is also a terrific matchup that would normally not even be a second matchup on a show like this, would normally have its own show, and that is two of the best 154-pounders in the world, Adrien and Lara, taking on Austin Trout. Really important fight for those two men, because the two of them, both of them, in line for major fights, either with Canelo Alvarez, who knows, maybe even Floyd Mayweather if he decided to step up to 154 pounds. So that fight has lots of implications and a fascinating matchup, in my opinion. Also on that card, Anthony Durrell taking on Sillakh and Stevenson for one of the 168-pound titles. And also Devin Alexander defending his welterweight crown against Anthony Durrell. Now we're also going to talk about the in a moment or two, the Guillermo Rigondeaux match with Joseph Agbeko, and the man we're going to do that with, I'm going to bring in right now to join us on this hangout, and that would be the estimable boxing writer on Yahoo Sports, gentleman I've known for many, many years, when he was in the newspapers here in Nevada, and now that he's the chief boxing writer for Yahoo Sports. That's Kevin Iole. Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing great, Al. Thanks, and I'm very proud of you getting into this newfangled technology.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, who knew that this was possible? I could barely send an email 5 years ago, you know? But
I think when we first met, we both had a lot more hair, a lot darker hair.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff wasn't part of our job on a day-to-day basis.
No, it was not. But it's fun. It's a great new medium. And, of course, before we get into even those fights, the fascinating thing about your career trajectory is that, and you and I have talked about this on many occasions, you're in the newspaper business where you became a very well-respected boxing writer, but the world that you entered into on Yahoo, a much larger world and a very different world for journalism.
Well, it is, and the interesting thing, and I think I mentioned this to you at one point now, when you work at a newspaper, sometimes people say, oh, you wrote that just because you're trying to sell newspapers. And I can tell you right now, never one time was it ever true. I just wrote what I thought was the best news of the day. But when you go online, you actually know who's reading you. As a newspaper, when somebody picks up a paper, they drop the quarter or now 3/4 into the box to buy the paper. You don't know what they're going to read. Are they going to read the TV listings? Are they going to read the comics? Are they going to read all the stories? You don't know that. So I never knew if anybody was reading. Well, now I know pretty much to the person who's reading it, and that really affects what you write about, what people want to read about. Clearly, we're a business like anything else, and Showtime puts fights on the air that they think people want to watch, and I try to write stories that I think people want to read, and we can use the history we get from the readers and what they like and what they don't like to further our content down the road.
Yeah, it's intriguing. You have much more information, and they can react to you immediately, which is good and not so good sometimes.
Not always good.
Not always good. Now, let's chat a little bit. First, we'll go backwards, then we'll go forwards. This last weekend, a couple of light heavyweight fights that were really intriguing in a way of comparison. Sergey Kovalev, first of all, scored a dramatic knockout victory, and I think we learned a few things about him. In addition to the punching power we already know he has, he's a badass. I mean, his behavior overall was surly at best in some respects, yelling at the guy when he's down. But I'll tell you what, he is a powerful man.
No, I think Sergey Kovalev is the real deal, and I think he fought his way into Fighter of the Year consideration. I would still go with Floyd Mayweather Jr., but when you look at it, both guys that fought on Saturday night in Quebec City, Adonis Stevenson and Sergey Kovalev, have to be in that argument because of the years that they've had. A lot of knockouts, a lot of quality wins, especially on the part of Adonis Stevenson, and I think the light heavyweight division is going to be a division to watch in 2014.
Yeah, and you alluded to Adonis Stevenson, who also scored an important win that night against Bellew. Are we seeing in Adonis Stevenson, it strikes me we are, but I'll be curious to get your opinion, a fighter who is not just a slugger, but has a pretty good skill set?
Yeah, I think that's what strikes me about him, is that he's a guy that has a lot of power, certainly not as much power, let's be honest, as Sergey Kovalev, but there's not a lot of guys in the sport of professional boxing who have the kind of power that Sergey Kovalev has. But trust me, Adonis Stevenson has enough power to knock anybody out, and he's got some boxing skill. He was trained by Emmanuel Stewart, and I think the thing that Emmanuel Stewart did with him most of all that's so impressive is he's improved his balance. I saw Stevenson fight, right when he was first starting out with Emmanuel, and he didn't have that kind of balance, and so sometimes he was easy to hit. He wasn't in position to put off his own shots, but now he has that balance, and he can set up things and get his punches off. That's why I would favor him over Sergey Kovalev were they ever to meet.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that's an intriguing point. And of course, a lot of the fans are hoping that'll happen. Before we move on to the card coming up, what do you think is the likelihood they will face each other soon? They weren't. I think Stevenson was talking about Trout and Bernard Hopkins and other people.
Yeah, I think that they'll fight. I honestly do, Al. And the reason I do is this. There's more money in a Bernard Hopkins fight, but if you're Adonis Stevenson, what do you gain by fighting Bernard Hopkins? If you win, it's not going to be the kind of dramatic fight that you want. It's not going to be the back and forth. It's going to be, a hold, clinch, technical, crazy fight, typical Bernard Hopkins fight. Certainly a Froch fight would be an entertaining fight, but I think, Froch now drops a little bit in a lot of people's opinion after, what happened with George Groves on the 23rd.
Especially moving up in weight.
Yeah, and he's going up in weight. It was a disappointing performance. I think you look at it and you go, what guy can you beat that would make you the best for your next fight? And to me, for Kovalev, it's Stevenson. For Stevenson, it's Kovalev. So I think it's perfect, and it would be a bombs-away fight. Yeah,
intriguing. Let's look forward now. This weekend, tomorrow I'll be getting on the plane to go to Brooklyn for the card that we're going to have on Showtime with Pauli Malignaggi and Zab Judah at the top of that card. And let me mention for folks, if they want to get my keys to victory and preview of that fight, they can go over to boxingchannel.tv. But wait till we're done here at the on the Hangout. Don't leave us yet, because Kevin has many important things to say, and I'm pretty sure. I think at the end of this, he's going to reveal where Jimmy Hoffa is buried. Didn't you have that nugget for us?
That's coming up later.
Oh, that's later. Okay, that's the next time. You're not going to give us all the good stuff right off the bat. No,
you'll never invite me back.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, there's always the Loch Ness Monster. You got that one locked up. You know all kinds of things. But the Zab Judah Pauli Malignaggi fight is an intriguing one. And Dan, let's remind everybody, the last time Pauli Malignaggi was in the ring was against Adrien Broner in Barclays in a charged atmosphere. Let's remind ourselves how that one went.
You got it. Here we go.
Now putting together the combinations and landing on Broner. Then Broner started landing big power shots. As he did, the tide of the fight turned. There's a nice left hook by Broner, backing up Malignaggi. Broner won a block of rounds in the middle part of the fight. Then toward the end, Malignaggi had some good moments setting up the decision. And the new WBA welterweight champion of the world, Adrien "The Problem" Broner. So the always subdued Adrien Broner ended up winning against Pauli Malignaggi in a split decision. And for Pauli, because his performance, I think, Kevin, was very good in that fight, in a very close fight, he raised his stock in some ways, I think, and created, I think, more of a dynamic for this fight with Zab Judah. Would you say that's a fair statement?
No, I definitely agree. I thought Broner won the fight, but I thought, Al, that Pauli fought well enough to deserve another major fight. And I think this is a perfect fight for him. I thought in the Broner fight that Broner, was just hitting too hard, and he hurt Pauli a couple times. I thought, Pauli just never was able to hurt him. And I thought after the early part of the fight where Pauli seemed to be in charge, Broner kind of took over and started to pull away. But I think Pauli is a 100% heart and soul fighter, and he's the kind of guy that is not going to give up. And so, he's a guy you want to have on television because he's going to come to fight. He's always there, and he's not going to quit. And I think with Zab Judah, Zab Judah has also turned his career around. He had some bad losses for a while there, and I thought maybe after the Mayweather fight, that would be it in 2006. And look, he's back now, and in a lot of significant fights. So I think it's a really intriguing fight, and I think both of them have earned their way to this, which also makes it an interesting fight.
Yeah, that I agree with you. And toward that end, let's go back for a moment or two. Let's look at and we'll chat a little bit more about Zab Judah. Let's go back and look at Zab against Danny Garcia, and his performance against Garcia, which was pretty good, takes on even new dimensions because of what Garcia did against Lucas Matisse. So Dan, let's take a look at a recap of Garcia and Zab Judah.
This is Garcia, 19-12 according to show stats, and for the lowest number of punches thrown by Garcia was 49 in that last round. So we'll see if that subtle change can push this fight a little more in Zab Judah's direction. And there are the numbers that demonstrate what I was talking about, and the 40% landed by Zab Judah, very impressive. That's a good percentage.
Garcia's been able to execute 2 good right hands to the body. Judah circling away, but into the area of that left hook, the lethal left hook of Danny Garcia. We saw stop from Mir Khan and Eric Morales.
Would you have ever expected after the 6th round that the 7th would have been a good round for Zab Judah?
He's having a pretty good round here in round 8.
I mean, so we see that's a little portion of the Judah-Garcia fight when Zab was starting to come back a little bit toward the end of that fight. That fight, too, as you pointed out, Kevin, gave Judah kind of enough cachet, if you will, for people to think, yeah, this is going to be an intriguing matchup. How much does – we always say this with Pauli. By the way, I looked back at the Broner fight the other night because I had to do some work for Showtime for features. And, I looked at that fight again, and I found more things that Pauli did in that fight to Broner that I thought were effective, and not as a big puncher, but in terms of landing punches. He's very busy, and he's much more stationary now, as is Zab Judah. How much of a difference does it make in this fight that Judah has a little more pop than Pauli, or is that not a major factor in this fight?
Well, Al, in any fight, when you expect it to be close, if one guy has power and the other guy doesn't, I think that's a big factor because that's scored in professional boxing. And so the guy landing the harder punches, the guy doing the more damage is going to get more credit. If you and I are fighting and you land 5 and I land 5 and your 5 are harder than my 5 and hurt me, you're going to win the round even though we landed the same amount of blows. So I think that's always the X factor in a fight, the power that one guy has. And, Zab Judah has the power to knock you out with that left hand of his. I mean, he has a legitimate snap in that left hand. And, he's not what you would call a Mike Tyson or a Sergey Kovalev knockout puncher, but certainly he can hurt you and he can get you out of there if he needs to.
Yeah, it should be a very good fight. And I think it should be an active fight. There might have been a time when those two men would have fought and we would have expected a very tactical boxing match. But I think this one's going to be a little more, given the charged atmosphere, the place they're at in their career, and the way they've been fighting lately, I think it's going to be pretty interesting. The same could be said about the match right under it, which features 2 men who are tremendous technicians. And it's funny, if you take Erislandy Lara and Austin Trout, and then you take Zab Judah and Pauli Malignaggi, the 2 main fights of this card, I don't think I've ever done a card in which the 4 fighters had higher boxing IQs. These are 4 men that know the sport of boxing inside and out. And Lara and Trout are 2 very clever boxers. But a lot is at stake for them in this fight. And because of that, it seems that, they have a lot to prove here.
In some ways, Al, this fight to me is the main event because it has a lot riding on it. Neither of these guys can afford a mistake. They're both guys, when you think of Austin Trout and Erislandy Lara, they're guys that managers say, you don't want to fight him. You don't want to be anywhere around this guy. And those are the kind of fights that, when you finally get the 2 guys in the ring, they have to win. They have to look good because of their style. So they want to get a big fight. You need to win and look good in this fight. So I think there's a lot of pressure on both guys to perform.
And here's something that I think fans have to remember, and we're going to take a look at a little bit of it to remind ourselves. Both of them were in exciting fights the last time they fought. And in fact, Lara was in a Fight of the Year candidate with Alfredo Agulo. And let's take a look at round 8, Dan, a little bit of that action, which demonstrates really what an exciting fight that was.
Here we go.
Lara's body, but Lara utilizing his technique, his footwork, the jab, and there it is, launching the straight left hand to kick off round number 8.
Lara landed 33 punches to only 14 by Agulo, according to show stats. And, Lara is being forced to throw more punches than he normally does. He threw 64 punches in that last round. And look at those nice counter punches.
And the counter lefts are again beginning to find their target. Sorry, Pauli.
No, that's a good point Al was making. Agulo finds himself always in front of Lara, and Lara finds this guy always in front of him. The only way you can get away is if you got to keep punching. You can't just keep running. So it's forcing the output to be higher for Lara. And again, between that and the body shots, it'll be interesting to see how much energy Lara has left late.
Agulo just right in front of Lara, absorbing the punishment, but dishing it out as well. And really, he has looked the best we've seen. Of course, 56 seconds was all it took for him to win his first fight in a year. And then in his last fight, maybe a tougher test than anticipated against the smaller Jorge Silva, but in this fight, Lara and Agulo putting on an amazing display thus far, 1:40 remaining in the round.
What we haven't seen in this fight, there have been clashes of heads in a number of Lara fights. He was even penalized against Hernandez for headbutting, and of course there was a clash of heads.
There's an example. So in round 8, we see a lot of the action from these two fighters, and Austin Trout himself in an action fight against Canelo down in San Antonio in front of 38,000 people. So while we know these men are boxers, we have to assume that they're going to engage because of what you talked about in terms of the importance of this fight.
Yeah, I think so. And, the interesting thing is who is going to be the one to lead, because I think
exactly.
How they decide that is going to be who wins the fight. I think each of them is a natural counterpuncher, wants to set somebody else up to make a mistake. And, so I think that there's going to be a lot of cat and mouse. And I think early on, you might see a lot of technical boxing and a boxing chess match early as they figure out, the way they're going to attack this. Lara, to me, is just a terrific fighter who's been, people talked about Paul Williams as one of the most avoided fighters. Arizlandi Lara, I think, would deserve to be near the top of that. And certainly Trout, too. Trout got a couple of big fights against Miguel Cotto and Canelo Alvarez, but, before that, he was a guy racking up a lot of wins without a lot of notoriety. So, I think it's going to be a very intriguing fight. I have to go with Lara, Al. I don't know about you, but Lara just has that thing about him. And here's a guy that was criticized for much of his career for being boring and for, not wanting to fighting backwards. And I thought that fight with Agulo was pretty entertaining. It's not hard to look good with Agulo. Agulo comes right at you.
Yeah.
That was
and
a good
fight. Drop him. He did drop him.
It was a good one.
And he did drop him in that fight.
Twice, wasn't it?
Yeah. Lara was down twice in the fight, and it was, to me, it was possibly the most exciting fight I've announced this year, and there have been a lot of great ones. Also on that card, Anthony Durrell against Saki Obika, and of course, now something you're going to write a story about, Devin Alexander defending his crown against Sean Porter. And if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned you have a story coming up on that this week, right?
Yeah, I'm going to do a piece on Sean Porter later because I think he's a guy that, maybe a lot of casual boxing fans won't know, but a really talented fighter and a guy that, is in a really interesting position now because you look at it, Richard Schaefer's plan was to put Devin Alexander in against Amir Khan. And I guess, Amir Khan figured, well, I'll just hold on for the Mayweather fight and see if I get the Mayweather fight. So that fight didn't happen. So Sean Porter kind of fell into this title shot. He was just there going about his business, doing his work, and now he gets a title shot, which really could change his career. He's been around for a few years, hasn't gotten that premium level fight, has looked good most of the time. He had the one hiccup when he fought to the draw with Julio Diaz, but a good, solid amateur fighter, a good, solid professional fighter who now I think has a chance against a really good fighter and yet another left-hander, Devin Alexander. We got a lot of left-handers on this card, and I think I'm going to write about Sean Porter, the opportunity that is in front of him.
Yeah, it's interesting, and of course that draw with Diaz looked better when Diaz fought Amir Khan to a standstill. So Diaz had reinvented himself as a fighter and actually was kind of better in these last year or so than he had been for a while before it. So that should be a fun card, and I'm looking forward to it. And by the way, also that Lara Trout fight. If you go to BoxingChannel.tv, you can see my previews and keys to victory on that one as well. Let's talk about another fight this weekend. Not too far down the road in the Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City, where Guillermo Rigondeaux is going to be taking on Joseph Agbeko. And Rigondeaux, of course, back in the ring after his beating Donaire. And just to refresh people's memory, Dan, let's show a little bit of Rigondeaux and Donaire and how Rigondeaux was able to give him a master class in boxing.
Absolutely. We get good music with this one, too.
Ah, perfect.
Feel it.
So Rigondeaux performing very well against Nonito Donaire in a fight in which so many people, me included, pretty much thought Donaire was probably going to win. Not because Rigondeaux wasn't a good fighter, but Nonito Donaire had been so dominant for the most part. Rigondeaux, Kevin, has not found it to be a smooth transition from that huge win to getting another fight. Now, he gets this fight against a very good fighter in Joseph Agbeko, but there was a lot of reticence on the part of HBO to put him on, not feeling that he's an exciting fighter.
And even on part of his promoter, Top Rank. I remember when that fight was over, and I was thinking, my Lord, who's going to want to see Rigondeaux fight again? And Bob Arum came over, and without me saying a word to Bob Arum, he said, what am I going to do with this guy? And just kind of echoed what I was thinking. Now, Al, this is interesting. I got a really big backlash from my column from that fight from the hardcore boxing fans who really like Rigondeaux and what he did. And, some people said, well, you like Andre Ward, you like Bernard Hopkins, what they do. And I'll focus on Ward versus Rigondeaux. What I answer to that is this. Rigondeaux was making Nonito Donaire miss, but he certainly wasn't landing that next punch and making him pay a lot. Later in the fight, to his credit, he did do that. He hurt Nonito a couple of times. But I thought that he was really fighting not to get hit and not to win, rather than win the fight. He was just trying to avoid getting hit. And that was my problem with him, where I think Andre Ward fights a smart defensive type fight, but he follows with that counter when he has it, as he proved against Chad Dawson and other people. But, Rigondeaux is an extremely talented fighter, and I would expect him to be able to handle Joseph Agbeko fairly easily in this fight. Yeah,
Agbeko, former bantamweight champion, who, of course, is best known for his fights with Abner Mares, the first one marred by low blows and some questionable officiating, and then the second one Mares was able to win. But Agbeko, a very good fighter who was a champion in his own right, but the speed and boxing ability of Rigondeaux would seem to be too much for him. We'll see how that plays out in Atlantic City. Now, you've got a couple of stories coming up that I think are fascinating on Yahoo Sports, and one of them is one in which you kind of go back and look at the year in boxing and do it vis-a-vis the TV networks that are showing boxing. And much like me, I think you feel that this was a banner year for the sport with tremendous fights all up and down the slate. And the TV folks kind of figured into why that was such a good year, didn't they?
They did, Al. I really believe that the HBO decision to not show Golden Boy fights was largely responsible, or in large part responsible, for this great year we had. And you might say, well, how can that possibly be? Well, here's what I think happened. I thought at the time, oh, this is a disaster and it's really going to be bad. But I think what happened was, you had Golden Boy Promotions that promoted fights on both networks. Top Rank, which was mostly HBO but did some Showtime fights. They, now what you have is you have Top Rank's fights are on HBO. Golden Boy is not splitting their product up. They're putting all those fights on Showtime, so all of their best matchups are going to Showtime. And because they have more fighters than Showtime has dates, you're getting these triple headers and quadruple headers with a lot of really good fights, deep cards that have good fights from top to bottom. And I think it ultimately has benefited boxing the way that this feud, if you want to call it that, this battle between the networks, has worked out. It's really benefited the fans. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do when you're broadcasting fights. You're trying to get subscribers. You know, some people misinterpret on the premium cable, Al, and I know you know this. Some people think they're looking for ratings, and really that's not true. You know, the ratings are for people like me and the media to talk about and say, hey, you know, what was interesting. But in premium cable world, they're looking at subscribers. So when Showtime signed Floyd Mayweather, did that get them a bunch of subscribers? If it did, it made them money. If it didn't, you know, then the deal is not as good as we thought on paper. That's the thing, and I think that both networks have improved in that regard because they've had great boxing offerings.
Yeah, you know what you said, in my opinion, is a very accurate reflection of what went on, and it's interesting how the machinations of all these things in these executive offices has such a huge influence. And then there's the two promoters, of course, who, as you say, have this great rivalry now that's fueled by the networks that they're aligned with. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out over the next year. The final fight, big fight of the year, is, to me, a very intriguing one. It is Adrien Broner against Marcos Maidana in a card that we're going to have next week, which also has a very interesting fight on it. Keith Thurman against Jesus Soto Caraz, which I think is a terrific fight. But the Broner-Maidana fight, we saw a little bit of Adrian Broner a little earlier in some of the video with when he fought Pauli Malignaggi. He's a fascinating figure because, of course, he's flamboyant. Some people would say terminally annoying. Others find him to be a showman. You know, he's a polarizing figure, that's for sure. As a boxer, many believe he is still virtually untested because in his two major matches with Daniel Ponce de Leon and Pauli Malignaggi, he barely escaped with victories, and no one's really sure how good he is yet.
You know, Al, I agree so much with what you just said because, you know, Broner is out there, and a lot of people, I think much credit to Broner for this because Broner talks a good game. You know, they're taking this attitude that, you know, Broner is the next Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather, when he was 20 years old, didn't beat Gennaro Hernandez. He destroyed Gennaro Hernandez. And Mayweather, you know, did some things at a very young age and was fighting at an extraordinarily high level that Adrien Broner, this far into his career, hasn't come close to doing. So let's stop these comparisons that Broner is the next Mayweather. That's absolute nonsense. You know, I think he's a talented guy that can become, you know, and I think he can become one of the better, if not the best fighters in the game down the road, but you don't do that by putting sex tapes out and cursing all the time and all this BS that he does. You do it by winning fights and looking impressive against good fighters. And if I look at Adrien Broner's career, I see that it's marked by two things. It's marked by A, all this crazy flamboyance and ridiculous stuff that he does outside of the ring, and B, it's by less than top opposition. You know, if you're at the stage that he's at, and the two best opponents you fought by far are Daniel Ponce de Leon, who was moving up in weight, and Pauli Malignaggi, you know, you haven't faced the elite guys in the world yet. There's plenty of them in his weight classes he could have fought, and he has not fought them. So I think Adrien Broner still has a lot to prove.
I couldn't agree more. And the other big question is going to be, he's eaten himself up a couple of weight classes. Whether he should be a welterweight at this point is a big question, and whether he has the power to deal with it. And Marcos Maidana, of course, we know, who also moved up to 147, is a powerful, powerful puncher. So we're looking forward to that fight, and I think it's going to be a good one. Kevin, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Dan, remind everybody, if you can, where they can, how they can avail themselves of Kevin and all the other places they can contact us as well.
Absolutely, Al. Okay, so first of all, thank you all for joining us and watching tonight. This was our first one, and thank you again for all the support. Kevin, if you want to reach Kevin, he is at Kevin I on Twitter. You can find Al at Al Bernstein on Twitter. You can also find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Al Bernstein Live. You can also find Al on Google Plus at Al Bernstein Live.
I'm everywhere.
And I know this is going to blow your mind. You can even find Al on Foursquare. I know that sounds crazy, but if you look, Al Bernstein's top 10 places to watch a boxing match is on Foursquare. One of Al's great contributions to our social media world.
Well, there you go. Kevin, I want to thank you again, and we're looking forward to all the articles that you're going to have up in the next few weeks. And I know as you look back on the year and cover the last part of this, that along with the MMA will keep you busy heading into the holidays.
I love it. It's been a great year and a lot more great fights before December, and so I'm looking forward to it. Al, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
I really appreciate it. You're a good man, and thanks for spending the time and making the effort for this. Well, we're going to, as Dan mentioned, we're going to be back on Saturday night, a half hour after the fights end, or the Showtime show ends. I'll be there. I'll be giving you my thoughts on what transpired in this 4-fight card, and also we'll be fielding everyone's questions. So, Dan, thank you very much for your efforts and getting us off and running. And for all of you, if you have comments on our Hangout and want to comment on what you'd like to see in the future, hit us up on Twitter or Facebook, and we'll be happy to entertain those thoughts. Take care, everybody.